The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer as Sarah Chen moved through the ICU at 2 in the morning, her footsteps soundless on the linoleum. The antiseptic smell hung thick enough to taste bleach and copper and the particular staleness of recirculated air that never quite left a hospital at night. She checked before on bed 3, her fingers finding the patient's radial pulse in less than 3 seconds, muscle memory from a life she wasn't supposed to remember anymore. Steady. 104. Elevated but stable. She made a note on the chart and moved to the next bed without ceremony, without the small gestures of tenderness that made other nurses recognizable. Just efficiency. Just work. Just a night shift nurse doing what night shift nurses do. Oak Creek Memorial didn't know who she was. Nobody knew. The hospital records listed Sarah Chen, RN, hired 3 years ago with credentials from a civilian nursing program in Maryland. No gaps. No inconsistencies. No classified sections that needed redaction. The Navy had been very thorough about erasing Major Sarah Chen from every military database, every service record, every official roster. They'd been less thorough about erasing her from memory, but that wasn't their job. That was hers. She touched the dog tag briefly, a habitual gesture she performed at least 40 times per shift, every time she was alone. The chain was broken, the metal tarnished to a dull gray that caught no light. It hung beneath her scrubs, hidden against her collarbone, where she could feel it without anyone seeing it. The weight of it had become as necessary as breathing. Without it, she would have forgotten who she'd been. With it, she couldn't quite manage to become anyone else. The night shift stretched ahead of her like every other night shift, predictable and numb. 12 hours of checking vitals, adjusting medications, watching monitors, keeping people alive through the hours when the hospital's official machinery was sleeping. This was where she belonged now. This was what disappeared people did. They took jobs that nobody else wanted and they did them well enough that nobody looked too closely. She'd been doing it for 36 months without incident, without a single person asking questions that mattered, without anyone guessing that the quiet nurse in the corner had seen things in Tikrit that would have ended anyone else's career. Then Dr. Caldwell entered the ICU for rounds, and Sarah knew the night was about to change. He moved through the unit the way he moved through everything, as if he owned it, as if the building's physical structure bent to accommodate his presence. His white coat was pristine, pressed with edges sharp enough to draw blood. His shoes clicked on the tile in a rhythm that made several patients flinch without waking. He was 63 years old and carried himself like a man who had never once been told no. Chief of Medicine for 11 years. Board member for 7. Connected to people in city government whose names didn't appear in newspapers but whose voices carried weight in rooms where real decisions were made. He catalogued the ICU with his eyes the way an inventory manager might survey a warehouse, noting what was present, what was missing, what didn't meet his standards. He watched Sarah work on a sepsis case in bed 6, a 68-year-old man with blood cultures still pending. She was adjusting the rate on a vancomycin drip, her movements precise and economical. She didn't look up. She never looked up when Caldwell was watching. She'd learned long ago that drawing his attention was like drawing lightning, it hurt and it left marks. The charge nurse, Maria, whispered something to him as he passed. Sarah couldn't hear the words, but she heard the tone shift in his voice when he responded. A name was coming. Someone new. Maria's face had that particular arrangement of concern and resignation that meant the admission was bad. Sarah had learned to read these signals like tactical maps, learned to understand what was coming before the admit papers arrived. Then Maria appeared at Sarah's shoulder, her voice low and careful. New admission coming to bed 2. Commander James Garrett. 57-year-old Marine. Multi-organ failure. Septic shock from an unidentified pathogen, overseas acquisition, probably Tikrit deployment 3 weeks ago. Rare infection, something the infectious disease specialists haven't seen before. Cytokine storm indicators across the board. Families here. Adult son is Marine captain, which means the son understands exactly how serious this is. Sarah's hands kept moving, adjusting the line, labeling the bag, but something in her body went very still. Tikrit. The word landed like a round hitting a ceramic plate. Charts already been circulating, Maria continued, not noticing Sarah's sudden precision in every movement. Every attending has reviewed it. Every one of them has declined. Sarah's fingers found the dog tag beneath her scrubs. Once. A single contact, a confirmation that she was still here, still real, still hidden. Caldwell's not happy about it, Maria said. He says the family's pushing hard. Son's got rank. Apparently they're not taking no for an answer. The doors to the ICU burst open with the particular energy that arrival brings, and Sarah looked up for the first time since Maria had started speaking. The stretcher came through first, the patient a wasted figure beneath oxygen lines and monitor leads, his body made small by illness. Behind it came the family, a woman Sarah assumed was a wife, her face locked in that particular expression of controlled terror that families wear when they're watching someone die in slow motion. And then the son. Marine captain in dress uniform, shoulders back, eyes forward, but those eyes were tracking the machines, reading the monitors, understanding with military precision exactly what each number meant. He saw his father's oxygen saturation at 87%. He saw the lactate levels climbing. He saw the story those numbers were telling, and he understood that it wasn't a good story. The bed 2 monitor came alive with vital signs. Blood pressure 92/58. Heart rate 136. Respiratory rate 28. Temperature 104.3. The room filled with the beeping of alerts, the hiss of the ventilator breathing for a man whose own lungs had surrendered. Caldwell appeared at the bedside with his entourage, residents, a nurse practitioner, the attending from emergency medicine. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. Status report. Who's taking this case? Silence. The particular silence of medical professionals who have already reviewed the odds and found them unacceptable. The infectious disease specialist, Dr. Hayes, spoke carefully. The mortality risk on this presentation is 73%. Possibly higher given the unknown pathogen. Renal failure is already advanced. Hepatic function is declining. We don't have a treatment protocol for this organism. I can offer supportive care, but... Supportive care means he dies, the Marine captain said. His voice was quiet, but it had the weight of command in it. My father is a commander in the United States Marine Corps. There has to be someone who will take this case. There are things that money can't fix, Dr. Hayes said, not unkindly. And there are things that skill can't fix either. Your father's immune system is attacking itself. We can slow that process, maybe, but reversing it. Sarah was already moving toward the bed. She didn't remember deciding to move. Her body had made the decision without consulting her mind, responding to something deeper than conscious thought. She reached for the chart, and that's when she saw the name clearly for the first time. Commander James Garrett. 3 tours of Tikrit, the latest deployment 2 months ago. Service record that stretched back 34 years. The photograph clipped to the front of the chart showed a face she had not seen in 8 years, 2 months, and 12 days, not that she was counting. She froze. Just for a moment. Just long enough for the tremor to move through her hands, making the chart shake slightly. Then she breathed. One measured breath that came from somewhere deeper than her lungs, from someplace that had trained her to survive the unsurvivable. The tremor stopped. Her hand steadied. The moment passed so quickly that no one else would have noticed it, except Dr. Caldwell had been watching her, and he noticed everything. He watched the moment her hands trembled. He watched the moment her hands stopped trembling. He watched recognition move across her face like a shadow, quick and complete. His eyes narrowed. He had seen something. He didn't know what, but he had seen it. Caldwell turned away and spoke to the room without looking back at Sarah. We'll discuss treatment options. For now, he stays. Someone will be assigned to monitor his progression. The words hung in the air like an insult and a challenge combined, as if he'd already decided who that someone would be, and as if he'd already decided that it would be punishment for something she hadn't done yet. Sarah looked at the man in the bed, at the face that had aged, that showed the weight of illness and survival, but was unmistakably the same face she had seen in a courtroom in Camp Leshan 8 years ago while he explained to a judge advocate why Major Sarah Chen's version of the Tikrit operation was inconsistent with his own version, why her account of what had happened that night couldn't possibly be accurate, why she was either delusional or lying or both. The face of the officer who had court-martialed her to bury his own failures. The face of the man who had destroyed her career so completely that the Navy had decided it was easier to erase her from existence than to defend her. And she was being asked to save his life. The Marine captain was watching her. "You're taking the case." Sarah's voice, when she spoke, was steady. The deferential tone of a night shift nurse speaking to a family member. "I'll monitor his vitals. We'll start with what we know works. Fluid resuscitation, broad-spectrum antibiotics, aggressive supportive care." "Thank you," the captain said. His eyes held something that looked like gratitude but also looked like understanding, as if he recognized in her something beyond the scrubs and the hospital badge, something that suggested she knew things that most night shift nurses didn't know. Caldwell was already moving toward the exit, his entourage following like planets orbiting a cold sun. But he paused at the doorway and looked back at Sarah, just for an instant, and in that instant his face showed something that looked like satisfaction. As if he'd planted a bomb and was waiting to see how long it would take to detonate. Sarah turned back to the monitors. Oxygen saturation 86% and falling. Heart rate 140. Blood pressure dropping. The cytokine storm was accelerating, Commander Garrett's own immune system turning against his organs like a friendly fire incident happening in his bloodstream. The lactate was climbing, the signs of cellular death spreading through him with the inevitability of tides. She had 16 hours ahead of her. Maybe less. She had no idea what was coming, no idea that the night was only beginning to show its teeth, no idea that before this shift ended she would commit acts of insubordination that would make Caldwell move against her with the precision of a man who had perfected the art of destruction. But she touched the dog tag again, felt its weight against her chest, and something that had been numb for 8 years flickered with the faintest suggestion of heat. She was being asked to save the man who had erased her. She was going to do it anyway. Dr. Caldwell was waiting outside Garrett's room when the stretcher rolled through the ICU doors. His presence seemed to darken the corridor, the kind of deliberate blocking that doctors learned in administrative school, positioning himself between Sarah and the patient like a gatekeeper protecting something precious. Garrett's family trailed behind, a son in Marine captain dress blues, shoulders rigid with military bearing, and a daughter in civilian clothes whose exhaustion had hollowed out her eyes. Both moved with the particular heaviness of people who'd been told their relative was dying and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Caldwell's voice carried deliberately, loud enough for the family to hear, calculated to land like a surgeon's knife. "Ms. Chen, this case requires actual medical expertise. Not bedpan proficiency." He paused, letting the word settle. His smile was a weapon. "Perhaps you should observe from a distance. Let the physicians handle this one." Sarah took one measured breath. The kind of breath taught in combat medicine courses, the kind that steadied hands before they had to move through fire. She didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Her jaw tightened, but when she spoke, her voice was level, professional, stripped of everything but fact. "I can manage the case, doctor." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. He wasn't finished. He turned to Garrett's family with theatrical concern, his shoulders angling toward them in a gesture designed to appear protective but read as exclusionary. Commander Garrett served his country with distinction. 18 years, 3 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He deserves providers who didn't barely pass their licensing exams. The insinuation hung in the air like smoke that Sarah was barely competent, barely trained, barely worth the uniform this man wore. The captain's eyes flicked between Caldwell and Sarah, confusion crossing his face. His mother's hand gripped his arm tighter. Sarah's jaw clenched. One muscle. One involuntary response she couldn't suppress. But her hand stayed still. Her voice didn't crack. "I'll provide the care he needs." 6 words. Declarative. Complete. One tear escaped before she could stop it. Just one. She wiped it without breaking eye contact with Caldwell, without looking away from his face, refusing him the satisfaction of seeing her retreat. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint, 18 years of combat medicine, of holding together things that were falling apart, of swallowing pain and moving forward compressed into the space between heartbeats. Caldwell's smile widened. He'd drawn blood. Not the kind that showed, but the kind that mattered. Well then, he said to the family, gesturing toward Sarah as if presenting evidence in a trial. As a test, we'll let our available staff handle the initial stabilization. Let's see what they can manage. The word available carried its own weight, available because no one else wanted the case, available because she had nothing better to do, available because she was convenient. The captain looked at Sarah directly, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted, not quite recognition, but a question forming behind his eyes. He was military. He could read bearing, could sense capability beneath surface wounds. But Caldwell was already moving, ushering the family toward the family waiting room, already taking control of the narrative before anyone could ask the questions that might complicate his version of events. Sarah moved to Garrett's bedside. The monitors were a symphony of alarm, heart rate 128, oxygen saturation 74%, blood pressure 94/58 and sliding. The ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm, pushing air into compromised lungs. She began to work, fingers moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in conditions far worse than a temperature-controlled ICU. Vital signs, medication drips, the intricate dance of keeping a body tethered to life when it wanted desperately to let go. At 2 a.m, Sarah entered the break room for the first time in 15 hours. Her scrubs were damp with sweat and something darker. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects. For nurses were there, Madison, who'd trained her on the unit 3 years ago, Chen, no relation, who usually brought homemade dumplings on Thursdays, Torres, whose daughter was a sophomore at Temple, and Reeves, the quiet one who kept to herself. They were microwaving meals, chatting about a Netflix series, the kind of small talk that passes time between suffering. The room felt normal until Sarah sat down. Then the air pressure changed. Madison's sentence trailed off mid-word. Torres stopped reaching for the salt. Sarah pulled out cold coffee from her locker, wrapped both hands around the styrofoam cup. She didn't speak. She simply sat a day. One by one, they gathered their things. No eye contact. No acknowledgement. Madison threw away half a burrito, perfectly good food abandoned on the counter. Chen closed her phone with a decisive click. Torres grabbed her coat. Reeves was the last, lingering a moment as if she might say something, then following the others into the hallway. The door closed with a soft pneumatic hiss. Sarah sat alone under buzzing lights, watching condensation bead on the cold coffee cup, knowing exactly what had happened. Caldwell had sent a message through channels that moved faster than any official memo: don't associate with her, don't assist, don't risk your own reputation on whatever she was trying to prove. The social architecture of a hospital was as rigid and efficient as any military chain of command. You broke the chain broke you. She allowed herself 3 minutes. Just 3. She pressed her palm against the laminate table, feeling its cold smoothness against her scarred skin. The single dog tag hanging beneath her scrubs seemed heavier, the chain pulling at her neck like a restraint. In Tikrit, she'd learned to compartmentalize pain, to separate the body's betrayal from the mind's mission. She did that now, closing a mental door on the isolation, the humiliation, the knowledge that she was now radioactive in the eyes of every nurse on this unit. At 7:36 a.m., Sarah arrived for her shift and found the disciplinary write-up pinned to the public unit board. The paper was official, printed on hospital letterhead, her name rendered formally as the nurse Chen, as if she were a stranger. The charges were precise, insubordination and overstepping scope of practice. Formal warning. 6 staff members read it before she crossed the unit. The charge nurse wouldn't meet her eyes. One of the residents actually stepped away from the board as she approached, as if proximity to her might transfer contamination. Dr. Caldwell walked past her at 8:15 a.m., deliberately slowed his pace, and looked at the board, looked at it deliberately, letting her see him see it, then turned to face her directly. His voice was soft, almost intimate, which made it worse than if he'd shouted. "Still think you're qualified, bedpan?" The word landed exactly where he intended. Not just an insult, but a category reassignment. You weren't a nurse anymore. You were someone who emptied bedpans. You were below the surface, below the sight line, below the regard of physicians who operated in the rarefied air of actual medicine. Sarah removed the right up carefully, hand steady, movements deliberate. The paper bent along its center crease. She folded it once, then again, making the creases perfect, the kind of precision that Caldwell probably thought was nervous habit but was actually the automatic behavior of someone who'd maintained weapons systems in 100-degree heat with blood on her hands. She placed the folded paper in her pocket. When she spoke, her voice had dropped an octave. Not loud. Quieter than before, in fact. The kind of quiet that made people lean in to hear. "I'll take the case, no one else will." The hallway went dead silent. A monitor beeped somewhere distant, its rhythm wrong. A code alarm announced itself 3 floors up. But here, in this moment, in the space between two people and the invisible weight of everything neither could say, time held its breath. Caldwell's smile faltered. Just for a moment. Just enough that Sarah saw it, that crack in his certainty, that sudden understanding that he was standing next to something he couldn't categorize or control. He recovered quickly, turning away with a practiced laugh that sounded like gravel in a disposal, but the moment had registered. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint turning into something else entirely. The 16-hour vigil began at 11:19 p.m., and Sarah moved through the ICU with the precision of someone who had stopped asking permission and started asking for results. Garrett's vitals were screaming in a language only she seemed fluent enough to hear. His white blood cell count had climbed to 34,000. The cytokine storm wasn't subsiding, it was gathering strength like a hurricane rotating offshore. Core temperature 39.8 degrees Celsius. Lactate climbing. His immune system was eating him alive from the inside, and every organ was beginning to fail in sequence like dominoes made of tissue and hope. She reviewed the cultures again. Acinetobacter baumannii. Gram-negative, multi-drug resistant, the kind of pathogen that had learned to survive in the worst places on Earth. The kind that grew thick in field hospitals and dusty compounds where water was scarce and infection was a certainty. She knew this organism. Had seen it before, in places where the sand never washed clean from anything. The blood work showed septic shock progressing toward multi-organ failure. Protocol was palliative care now. Protocol was letting him go. Protocol was always the problem. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in a sickly whiteness, and she stood at the medication cart, waiting. Waiting for authorization. Waiting for permission. At 12:34 a.m., Dr. Caldwell strode through the ICU doors like he owned the marble beneath them, which, in his mind, he probably did. He'd been chief of medicine at Oak Creek for 7 years. 7 years of staff trembling when his pager went off. 7 years of nurses requesting transfers just to avoid his rounds. He saw Sarah at the cart and smiled the way a shark smiles at a hand trailing through the water. "What are you thinking?" he asked, though his tone suggested he didn't actually care what she was thinking. Broad-spectrum coverage. The culture sensitivities won't be back for another 12 hours. We need meropenem, plus vancomycin as backup. Caldwell picked up the chart, scanning it with the velocity of someone who'd never actually read anything in his life. No. His lactate is. I don't care if his lactate is tap dancing. You want antibiotics, you fill out the request. Then you wait for my approval. He handed the chart back like it was contaminated. Actually, no. Here's what's going to happen. I'm reassigning Jenkins and Martinez to the 3rd floor. Trauma surge. And Reeves, she's going to maternity. You're going to manage Garrett solo for the next shift. Sarah's hands remained perfectly still. That's not safe. That's not your decision. His voice dropped. You wanted the case that nobody else would touch. Congratulations. Now you own it. Completely. If you need anything, pharmacy, supplies, consultation, it comes through me. Personally. Every time. No exceptions. That's what happens when a bedpan pusher tries to be a doctor. He pulled out his phone and began typing. I'm also implementing a new roster protocol. You're isolated on your own zone. No cross-coverage. The code team for this floor is being reorganized. They'll respond from the East Tower now. Response time should be around 5 to 7 minutes, depending on traffic. He wasn't trying to help Garrett. He was building a cage around Sarah, one regulation at a time. She said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like a protest, and protests got documented. Caldwell had already proved he was an architect of paper, of trails, of tiny violations that accumulated into drowning. At 1:15 a.m., Sarah pushed the medication cart toward the pharmacy. The wheels squeaked softly, too loud in the quiet hospital, and she thought about Kandahar, about the aid station there with its morphine rations and its triage tags hanging from the wrists of Marines who'd been whole 3 hours before. The pharmacist, Henderson, a woman with 15 years of experience and the face of someone who'd learned not to ask questions, processed the meropenem order without comment. But she slid a second form across the counter. Caldwell's new standing order, Henderson said quietly. Personal authorization required for any controlled substances or anything above cost threshold. Sarah took the form. Of course he had. The isolation wasn't accidental. It was architecture. It was a masterclass in how to handicap someone using only bureaucracy and the structure they'd sworn to respect. By hour 7, Garrett's condition had stabilized slightly. The antibiotics were working, though slowly. His BP hung at 88/52, dangerously low, but stable. Sarah had managed his fluids, adjusted his sedation, and positioned him on his side to prevent aspiration. Her supporting staff was gone. The ICU felt like a ghost floor, empty corridors at 3 a.m., the kind of silence that had weight to it. At 4:22 a.m., hour 5 of her vigil, she sat at the bedside and watched his monitors. The heart rate was irregular, frequent PVCs, premature ventricular contractions, little electrical hiccups that suggested his heart was growing exhausted. The ventilator whooshed in its mechanical rhythm, pushing oxygen into lungs that should have been breathing on their own. Beside her, the dog tag on the broken chain hung from a hook on her scrubs, tucked beneath the fabric where no one could see it. She'd worn it for 8 years. Worn it under hospital scrubs, beneath civilian clothes, hidden against her skin like a scar that refused to heal. At 4:58 a.m., something changed. It wasn't gradual. It was a cliff. His blood pressure dropped like someone had turned off a valve, spiraling down from 88 to 74 to 62 to something that looked less like a number and more like the end of a story. The heart rate climbed, 138, 145, 152, his body screaming that something was profoundly wrong. The oxygen saturation began its descent. 94, 88. 82. Sarah moved. No hesitation. No internal debate. Her hands went to the monitors, reading the data with the speed of someone who'd been trained to keep people alive when all the systems that kept them alive were failing. His lung. The right one. Collapsed. Pneumothorax. The pressure inside his chest had built up until it crushed his lung flat, and now it was pushing on his heart, suffocating him from the inside. She hit the code button. The intercom crackled overhead. Code blue, ICU, room for 12. Then she waited. The seconds stretched like taffy. 10 seconds. 15, 20. No one came. The code team wasn't on this floor. They were 4 stories up, 3 corridors over, separated by elevators that would take their time and protocols that didn't care about the man in front of her whose oxygen sat was now 71 and dropping. Sarah moved to her locker. She kept an old MRE in there, a relic from 3 years ago, a meal she'd never eaten but had never thrown away. Some things you keep. Some things are insurance. The meal ready to eat was still sealed, the packaging intact. She ripped it open. The plastic crackled like breaking bone. She took the dog tag from around her neck. The chain snapped as she pulled, already weakened by 8 years of wearing it beneath her clothes, 8 years of it pressing against her sternum through every shift, every crisis, every moment she'd pretended to be smaller than she was. The tag was old military issue, tarnished silver, engraved with numbers that didn't exist anymore. She'd kept it for exactly this reason. Kept it because sometimes the most useful weapons were the ones no one expected you to have. The needle point of the dog tag was sharp enough. She punctured the MRE wrapper twice, creating 2 small holes. The plastic was thin but sturdy, designed to withstand field conditions. Designed, she realized, for exactly what she was about to do. She'd read about this once in a medical journal article about tactical medicine. About how sometimes the most sophisticated solution came from the simplest materials. An improvised chest seal made from flexible packaging, designed to prevent air from entering the pleural space while allowing fluid to escape. She positioned the seal over the point where Garrett's right lung had collapsed, her fingers finding the landmarks by touch. The second intercostal space. The midclavicular line. Muscle memory took over. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this before, though never on a ventilated patient, never in a hospital, never under fluorescent lights instead of moonlight bleeding through tent canvas. She pressed the seal firmly against his chest. His oxygen saturation climbed. 71, 76. 82. The ventilator's compliance changed, his lungs accepting the air more easily now that the pressure was releasing, that the lung was re-expanding like a fist opening. His blood pressure stopped its free fall. 62, 68. 74. The heart rate began its descent. 145, 138. 128. Stable. 58 seconds after she'd begun, Garrett was stable. The code team burst through the door at minute 5, 6 personnel moving with the choreography of people who'd done this 100 times. They stopped. Stared at the improvised chest seal. Stared at Sarah, whose hands remained exactly where they were, steady as surgical instruments. "What did you do?" The code team leader's voice was carefully neutral. "Pneumothorax. Collapsed lung. I stabilized it." One of the code nurses leaned closer, examining the seal. "That's from an MRE wrapper. It works." 60 seconds later, Dr. Caldwell arrived, moving fast enough that his white coat flapped behind him like wings. He took in the scene instantly, the code team, the patient, the improvised equipment still sealed to Garrett's chest, the dog tag lying on the bedside table like evidence. His face remained perfectly controlled, but his eyes narrowed to something predatory. He stepped closer to Sarah. Didn't touch her. Just leaned in enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, the antiseptic on his hands. "What did you do?" His voice was quiet. Very quiet. Which meant very dangerous. "I kept him breathing," Sarah said. Her voice didn't shake. Didn't apologize. Didn't ask permission. Caldwell picked up the dog tag. Turned it over in his hands. The engraving was faded but still visible. Numbers that meant something once. Numbers that wouldn't mean anything to him. "This is practicing medicine without a license," he said quietly. He raised his voice. Everyone out except Sarah. The code team hesitated. The team leader looked at Sarah, who nodded slightly. They filed out, and the room fell silent except for the ventilator's steady mechanical breath. Caldwell pulled out his phone and began photographing everything, the seal, the MRE wrapper, the dog tag, Sarah's hands. "You just ended your career," he said. "I'm documenting this as a violation of scope of practice. Unauthorized medical procedure. Practicing emergency medicine without a license. This goes to the board today. You won't be able to work at a Starbucks by the time I'm finished." Sarah said nothing. She couldn't defend herself. Couldn't explain that what she'd done was the only thing that could have worked, that protocols were written by people who'd never watched someone die in their hands, that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing were not the same thing. Garrett's son appeared in the doorway. He'd been in the family waiting room. He'd heard the code announced. Now he stared at the improvised seal on his father's chest. Stared at the dog tag on the bedside table. "Where did you serve?" he asked. Sarah turned away. "I didn't." But that wasn't the worst part. At hour 12, Garrett hemorrhaged. At hour 14, the hemorrhage started without warning. Garrett's abdomen distended. His pressure dropped 40 points in 90 seconds. The monitor screamed. Sarah's hands moved before her mind caught up, muscle memory from a field hospital in Tikrit where there was no backup, no second chances, just the choice between action and death. She stripped the sterile field. Packed the wound with gauze soaked in thrombin. Her fingers worked with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had done this while mortar rounds fell outside a concrete wall. Pressure. Pack. Tie. Pressure again. The bleeding slowed. Then stopped. The monitor steadied. The shrieking ceased. His daughter stood frozen in the observation window, both hands pressed against the glass. Her mouth moved soundlessly. Sarah didn't acknowledge her. She was already adjusting the medication drip, recalibrating the fluid replacement, watching the numbers climb on the screen like a ladder out of hell. O2 sat, 88. She increased the ventilator settings by 2 percentage points. 91. A resident appeared in the doorway, hesitated, then backed away. Whatever he was about to say died in his throat when he saw Sarah's face. There was no fear in it. No exhaustion. Just the absolute blank focus of someone operating on a different frequency than the rest of the hospital. 94. For the first time in 14 hours, Garrett's vitals stopped their free fall. They plateaued. Then, impossibly, they began to climb. Blood pressure holding at 96/62. Heart rate steady. Oxygen saturation at 94 and stable. The numbers that had defined his death sentence were now the proof of his survival. Sarah checked the 4 lines one final time, verified the medications, confirmed the ventilator settings. Then she sat today. Not in a chair. On the floor beside his bed, her back against the cool metal frame. Her hands finally trembled. Adrenaline leaving her body all at once. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and waited for the shaking to stop. Garrett's daughter entered the ICU without asking permission. She approached slowly, as if Sarah might break. Her hand touched Sarah's shoulder with the gentleness of someone touching a saint. "You saved him," the daughter whispered. "Twice." Sarah nodded once. She couldn't speak. Her voice had left her somewhere around hour 9, when she'd fashioned that chest seal and hadn't come back. At hour 15, Dr. Caldwell entered the ICU with hospital security and the chief nursing officer. His entrance was choreographed, formal, clinical. He carried her badge on a small metal tray like it was a relic. His smile was the smile of a man who had finally found the angle he needed. "Sarah Chen," he said. His voice carried across the ICU floor like a pronouncement. "You are hereby suspended effective immediately for protocol violations, practicing medicine without a license, and patient endangerment. Your badge. Now." The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilator's mechanical wheeze. Sarah rose to her feet. She did not protest. Did not explain. She simply unclipped her badge from her scrubs and placed it in his extended hand. The plastic was still warm from her body. He held it at arm's length like it might be contaminated. "She saved him," Garrett's son shouted, stepping forward in his navy dress uniform. "Captain! She saved his life." Caldwell cut him off with a raised hand. "She violated every standard of care in the hospital. If your father survives, Captain, it will be despite her recklessness, not because of it. She is a danger to every patient on this floor." He snapped his fingers at the security officer. "A dismissal." Inhuman in its precision. They escorted Sarah toward the exit. Not roughly. That would have left evidence. Just present. Just final. She passed the unit board where her disciplinary write-up still hung, the words bleeding ink in the fluorescent light. She passed the break room where she had sat alone at 2 in the morning while the other nurses collected their things in silence. She passed the supply closet where she had changed out of her dress uniform into scrubs 8 years ago and chosen to disappear. She didn't look back. In the parking garage at dawn, Sarah sat in her car with the engine dead and the keys in her lap. Her head pressed against the steering wheel. The steering wheel was cold. Everything was cold. The concrete pillars rose around her like a tomb. Grey light filtered through the levels above, weak and distant. She couldn't move. She couldn't cry, that would require energy she didn't have, emotion she couldn't access. Her body had burned through every reserve staying upright for 16 hours. Her mind had burned through every defense holding back the truth she'd been running from since Tikrit. The dog tag chain was still in her scrub pocket. She could feel its weight against her ribs. The only piece of proof that Major Sarah Chen had ever existed. The only reminder of what she'd sacrificed, what she'd lost, what she'd buried. Garrett had survived. His vitals were climbing. His daughter had touched her shoulder and thanked her. And she had been erased for it. The silence in the parking garage was absolute. No voices. No monitors. No Caldwell. Just concrete and exhaust fumes and the sound of her own breathing, which she couldn't quite remember how to do anymore. Hours passed. Maybe 3. Maybe 6. She sat without moving while the morning shift arrived and left their cars, while the second shift prepared for their shift changes, while the world continued its indifferent rotation around her. She stared at nothing. At 6 in the morning, the sound came first, a pressure wave that shook the concrete pillars, a physical force that rattled car windows in their frames. Sarah's head lifted slowly. Not in hope. In confusion. The rotor wash intensified. Loud. Impossibly loud. 3 shadows crossed the parking garage ceiling, massive silhouettes moving with precision across the rooftop of Oak Creek Memorial. The sound of helicopter skids scraping concrete echoed through the stairwells like an invasion. Black Hawks. She recognized the sound before she recognized anything else. The 160th saw profile. Night Stalker rotors. Military transport. She didn't move from her car. Whatever was happening above her had nothing to do with her anymore. She was just a nurse now. Just Sarah. Just nothing. At dawn, the rotor wash shook the windows like distant thunder. 3 Black Hawks descended toward Oak Creek Memorial's roof in perfect formation, their shadows sweeping across the parking lot below. The sound was unmistakable, a signature that turned every head in the ICU. Boots on tile. 1, 2, 3, 4. A Marine colonel in dress blue strode through the ICU entrance, his presence making the air pressure change like a storm rolling in. His eyes scanned the unit until they locked on the unconscious figure in the corner bed. Commander Garrett. He nodded to the charge nurse. I need to speak with Major Chen. Now. The room went still. A trembling floor nurse at the medication cart froze mid-motion, her hand suspended over a syringe. Major Chen. Not Nurse Chen. Not Sarah. Major. The colonel's voice carried the weight of command, the kind of authority that didn't ask questions, it stated facts and expected compliance. In Garrett's room, his adult son, Captain Marcus Garrett, straightened from the bedside chair. Marine dress blues, officer's insignia, jaw clenched with understanding. His eyes went wide. He snapped to attention, a reflex his body hadn't forgotten in 15 years of service. Sir. Yes, sir. The charge nurse's hand shook as she pulled the personnel file from the locked cabinet. Sarah Chen. Night shift nurse. 3 years. Night shift only. Never asked for daytime. Never requested leave. Never socialized beyond the break room. The folder was thin. Professional. Unremarkable. Until she found the second file beneath it, the one marked classified in red lettering. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Silver star. 2 purple hearts. Commendation for valor. Discharge date 8 years prior. The dates lined up perfectly with when Sarah had arrived at Oak Creek Memorial, walking in the door like someone emerging from a grave. The nurse's face went pale. She didn't breathe for 5 seconds. In the hallway, a SEAL team leader in dress whites emerged from the stairwell alongside the colonel. His presence was different, quieter, but somehow more lethal. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. He carried a tablet with the official investigation file, the one that had taken 6 months to complete. 6 months of interviews with Garrett's commanding officers, medical personnel in Tikrit, and the intelligence analysts who'd reviewed what actually happened in the Jolan district. The file had 3 conclusions. Commander Garrett had falsified court-martial proceedings. Major Sarah Chen had been exonerated officially, her record restored. And Commander Garrett had confessed to everything on what he believed was his deathbed, unable to take the lie into whatever came next. The SEAL team leader stopped at the doorway to Garrett's room and read the commendations aloud, his voice cutting through the silence like precision itself. Bronze Star. Meritorious Service Medal. He paused. Garrett's eyes opened. His son's jaw clenched tighter. Silver Star for heroism under fire. Another pause. The machines around the bed beeped steadily, the only sound besides the leader's voice. 2 purple hearts. Both combat-related. And a Navy Commendation Medal for tactical decision-making in the field. He lowered the tablet. All of it was real, sir. All of it earned. All of it deserved. And you took it from her. Garrett's hand found his son's arm, gripping it like an anchor. His voice came out rough, barely audible. I was afraid. I was a terrible commander and I was afraid. The confession landed like a weight. His son didn't move, didn't speak, just held his father's hand and let the truth settle into the space between them. The SEAL team leader walked to the window. Below, in the parking lot, 3 Black Hawks sat with rotors slowing, crews visible in the open doors. This wasn't a casual hospital visit. This was an extraction protocol. This was the Pentagon reaching down and touching ground at Oak Creek Memorial, Pennsylvania, because one of their own had been erased. What nobody in the building knew yet was that Dr. Caldwell was already moving, panic rising in his chest like bile. He'd seen the uniforms. He'd heard the word major. He understood, in the space between heartbeats, that everything he'd built, the reputation, the authority, the careful destruction of Sarah Chen's credibility, was about to collapse. His hand shook as he logged into the hospital security system from his office. The cursor moved across the screen, clicking frantically through file hierarchies. He needed to find the footage. The day he'd humiliated her in front of Garrett's family. The moment he'd pulled support staff mid-crisis. The subtle, strategic moves that looked like hospital policy but were actually witness intimidation in real time. If he could delete it, if he could erase the digital evidence, maybe the Marines would leave, maybe this would disappear, maybe he could. Access denied, the screen read. Files locked by system administrator. The office door opened without a knock. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, Navy veteran, IT administrator, and the man with a "Don't Tread on Me" sticker on his laptop and a photographic memory for every camera angle in the building. He'd been watching the feeds in real time for 18 hours. He'd seen the harassment. He'd documented the isolation. He'd watched a major in scrubs save a man's life using field medicine while the man in charge tried to have her removed. Webb's voice was quiet, which made it far more dangerous than a shout. Looking for something, Doc? Caldwell stood, his voice rising, authority attempting to reassert itself. This is my hospital. You work for me. Step back from that doorway. Webb laughed once, bitter and dry as desert wind. No. You're wrong on both counts. This is a federal investigation now. My job is protecting the servers, and I've already saved every frame to 3 separate encrypted drives. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The medication delays. The staff reassignments. The way you pulled the respiratory therapist during the hemorrhage crisis. The disciplinary write-up you posted publicly to humiliate her. Every strategic move you made to isolate a Marine officer treating a patient in a federal investigation. Webb pulled out his phone, showed Caldwell the email timestamp. I sent it to the State Medical Board at 0600 this morning. The FBI got a copy at 0630. The hospital board is receiving their email notification in approximately 90 seconds. You're fired, Caldwell said, and even he could hear how hollow it sounded. Webb smiled without warmth. I don't work for you anymore. I work for the hospital board. They make the firing decisions. And they just watched the same footage you were trying to delete. He turned toward the door. Your shift ends at 1900. Security will escort you out. You'll receive a formal termination notice tomorrow morning. After that, the FBI will probably want to talk about witness intimidation. He paused in the doorway. They don't like it when people try to erase heroes. The colonel was in the ICU now, speaking with staff. The charge nurse described the break room scene, the silence when Sarah had asked them to come help. The respiratory therapist explained how Caldwell had pulled him from the room mid-crisis, leaving Major Chen alone with a collapsing lung and no support. Each witness added a layer of documentation, each testimony a brick in the structure of what had actually happened here. Captain Garrett read the disciplinary write-up that had been pinned to the public board like a scarlet letter. His jaw worked, muscles clenching and releasing. He'd served under officers like Caldwell his entire career, men who led from authority rather than competence. Men who broke good people because it was easier than taking responsibility. He walked back to his father's bedside. Commander Garrett was conscious now, weaker than he'd been in weeks, but lucid. The sepsis was clearing. The organ function was returning. He was going to live. Dad. Did you know she was here? Garrett's eyes closed. When he opened them again, they were wet. Not until I saw her face. I thought she'd disappeared for good. I thought I'd succeeded in erasing her. His voice cracked like old leather. I destroyed her to hide my failures. I falsified a court-martial to save my career. And she stayed here for 16 hours to save mine. He turned his head toward his son. She didn't even know if I was worth saving. The FBI arrived at 1,400 hours, 2 agents in dark suits who moved through Oak Creek Memorial like they owned it. They requested all documentation related to Major Sarah Chen's suspension, all personnel files related to Dr. Caldwell's administrative decisions in the past 72 hours, all security footage from the ICU. The charge nurse watched from her station as Caldwell's office was entered by federal investigators. His hands were shaking. His career was ending in real time, one digital file at a time. 6 months later, Sarah Chen walked through Oak Creek Memorial's front entrance wearing marine dress blues. The uniform fit perfectly, tailored, pressed, the major insignia polished to military precision. Her Silver Star ribbon was visible, subtle but unmissable for anyone trained to read military decorations. Her hands didn't tremble. She'd spent the past half-year at Camp Lejeune, reintegrating into active service, reclaiming the rank and the identity that Caldwell had tried to bury. Commander Garrett had been transferred to Walter Reed for final recovery, but he'd requested she visit first, before he returned to full duty. She knew what she'd find when she saw him. Gratitude. Guilt. The complicated weight of owing your life to someone you'd once destroyed. She passed the unit board where her disciplinary write-up had hung. Now it displayed a commendation for exceptional care under crisis conditions, signed by the hospital board and the chief of medicine, a temporary replacement who'd wasted no time reversing Caldwell's decisions. She passed the break room where nurses now stood when she entered, respect replacing the silence of before. She passed the elevator bank where Dr. Caldwell, in his night security guard uniform, was emptying trash into a rolling bin. His name tag read C. Caldwell, Security. They made eye contact for exactly 2 seconds. He looked away first. Sarah continued without breaking stride. In Garrett's hospital room, he was sitting up, color returned, the man inside the body beginning to match the rank on his chest again. His son stood. His daughter stood. Sarah approached the bedside and placed the single dog tag on its broken chain on the table beside the heart monitor. The metal was still tarnished, still scarred from being used to puncture an MRE wrapper at 0300 hours, still carrying the weight of everything she'd hidden. "I don't need to carry this anymore," she said quietly. Garrett stared at the dog tag like it was made of pure light. His voice came out raw. "I confessed everything. To the investigation, to my family, to the core. I thought I was dying and I couldn't. I couldn't let you stay erased." His hand reached toward the dog tag but didn't touch it. As if it was too sacred. As if it might burn. Sarah's voice was measured, controlled, the voice of a major who'd spent 6 months reclaiming her authority. "You took 3 years of my life. I gave you 16 hours of mine. We're even." She turned to leave. Garrett's daughter spoke quietly from the corner. "Why did you save him? After what he did?" Sarah paused in the doorway, looked back once. Her eyes were clear. "Because that's who I am. Not who he made me." She walked out into the corridor in uniform, head high, boots echoing on tile in a rhythm that sounded like purpose. The morning shift change flowed around her, nurses, doctors, orderlies moving in both directions through the hallway, and Sarah Chen walked among them, finally visible, finally acknowledged, finally free from the chain that had bound them both. Her dog tag remained on Garrett's table, catching the light, a reminder that the quietest person in the room might just be holding it all together. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who you really were, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment, would you have saved the man who destroyed you, or walked away? And like this video so it reaches the next person who needs to know their value doesn't disappear just because someone else decided to erase it.